Welcome back to the podcast that explores creating meaningful art experiences in the built environment. I'm your host, Martha Weidman, CEO and co-founder of 9 Arts. Today's guest is Poppy Patterson, an interior designer at DLR Group. Poppy focuses on enhancing company culture through intentional design. How can she bring brands to life and let them express themselves in a unique outlet, in a unique way? One of the future trends that she talks about is the way that work from home is influencing our relationship to the work environment and how we can create offices that are more attractive, that people want to come back to. You can learn more about Poppy and the work she's doing on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, take a moment to check out our state-of-the-art report at the 9 Arts website. That's the spot where we bring heart and soul to the data of the survey that we sent out and studied the ROI of art and community on the built environment. And enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we have Poppy Patterson with DLR Group, and I'm very happy to have her on the show to tell us more about her perspective on art and culture in the built environment. So, Poppy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Could you tell our listeners a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, and why it matters?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Poppy Patterson and I'm an interior designer. I've been working in the industry for 15 years and have been with DLR Group now for about 7.5 of those. And I focus on corporate workplace interiors, but I've also done some hospitality and healthcare in a more previous life, but I really enjoyed that sector as well. And so I've done corporate workplace kind of my whole career. And even with the opportunities going to different sectors, I've always come back to workplace. And I think I'm drawn to it because so much of our lives are spent kind of in the working world and spent in that work environment inside. And I think it just resonates thinking about creating space that affects people in a space that they work and live in and spend so much of their time in. So
I'm curious to know, as someone who is seeing the earliest phase of the future built environment, what are you working on right now that excites you that we might see more of in the future?
The pandemic and COVID shaping kind of these new ways of work for people, it's kind of forced us to rethink some of our typical planning and how we think of the office and what people is really driving them to go back to the office space, or even just rethink their personal workspace at home. And I think that conversations, even with just friends who are not in the industry and doing other work, has been really interesting to see how they've kind of adapted their homes and environments to just adapt to what they need and not relying kind of on their office workspace to do that for them.
So what role does art and culture play in this adapting environment, and how does that influence a project that you work on?
I think one of the key things in my job is really defining what that client culture is. And it becomes really key to any of the projects because it often influences the concept for the design immensely and how, it gets to the root of what that user is really looking for within their space and how they not only want to present to their employees, but also to the broader community if people are coming into their space and engaging with them in their workplace. And I think that, so that cultural piece and really kind of getting to the heart of what defines a company culture is so much of what I want to do in the beginning of a project and really try and define that for the client, because sometimes they don't even know, like, what is our company culture? And we have such an opportunity to go in and observe and kind of watch what they do and learn from just kind of being there and seeing their everyday work life. And I think art within that might not be a key component at first, but I think that there's something that is resonating more and more with clients and designers like myself who are seeing it as a real opportunity to kind of enhance the company culture and give them an outlet in ways to kind of portray what that culture is for them.
Can you give an example? So you're talking about enhancing the company culture, going through this visioning and discovery element to define and find what that is. So once you figure out what the company culture is like, can you give an example of how you bring that to life?
Our tech client that we've been fortunate to work on together, part of their culture and the way they think about designing their buildings is so focused around what that concept of the building is and how that will help define and shape spaces. And so, in this particular instance, we have this building that has these wonderful atriums in it, which are each defined by a phase of water. So, like the vapor or the liquid or the solid water. And just having the concept be a strong focus in the building is something that's very, that the client really drives us and pushes us to incorporate. And I think we found a way to focus and push those concepts through art in those spaces. And so, it was a goal of ours with this client that in order to manifest the company culture, we would really express these concepts to the in the I don't want to say the biggest way we can, but in a way that everyone that comes through the space can understand it. And so using the art along with architecture and the design of the space to say, like, you're in this liquid lobby that's going to kind of flow around you and envelop you and take you on this journey through the rest of your building. That was super important. And then I think uh, there's more literal ways, and other clients that I've worked with. I'm working on some Microsoft campus projects right now, and that's a unique client in the sense that they have a beautiful art collection that is, inherent to their brand, and those curators that work on developing their collection have really tailored it to say, like, yes, this is a Microsoft piece. This is something that we want to display within our buildings and shares a little bit about who we are as a company. Um, and so it's really fun to work with them when you know that they have this vast collection and these curators that you get to work with and say, here's our concept for this space. What pieces do you have in your collection that you can pull that will really enhance that in the design of of our interior?
That's cool. So you might say, all right, here's an idea. It's going to be themes of water or themes of light, and then you'll either find something from an existing collection, an art piece, and tell the story through a label with a company like Microsoft, or you might work with an artist and create a commission that's totally specific to that site and designed to carry that theme forward in that space.
And both of them are exciting. There's a law firm I did a while back that also had kind of their own unique collection. And part of the design of that and the inspiration of their existing art collection really became the concept for the space.
So when you think about an office space and people returning to work, do you think about the community that is surrounding? Because we hear a lot of talk in our industry about social impact and community engagement right now, and I wonder what that impact might be of in engagement on the business environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting, there's more explicit correlations when you work on a big public project, which, sometimes our office spaces. Um, we recently completed the Portland building renovation down in Portland on this kind of iconic building that has some inherent art around the exterior of it. And then, of course, with public work having, you know, 1% for art or whatever the site has deemed as being required. There's kind of this known component of including that, and I think that there is a real cool component now of the public entity asking for that community's input on what that piece is going to be. And speaking recently on our in our office, we had the group Hadad Drugan, I believe that's how you say it, who helped do the public art down at the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, and they gave us a presentation just kind of on their concept for doing that and engaging community members as well as the stakeholders from that project, and brought them all together in a variety of ways to um, think about what their offering was going to be around this site in a really public way.
I'm curious to hear if you use the term creative placemaking in your work at DLR. It's a very mainstream topic right now. But what does that mean to you?
Oh, interesting. I mean, absolutely, it's a term that we're hearing, and I think you know your clients are looking for you to kind of be like, what is it going to be for us, and how are you going to uh, how is this going to manifest for us specifically? And I think that for me, that really goes back again to that idea of what is the concept for this client and really kind of digging into understanding what their culture is, so that you can really create that concept of design for them that's going to resonate long term. And I think that each client is going to have their unique um, thing about them that's going to set them apart. And really finding out what that is going to, um, set up success for all the components that it touches, whether that be art or these different kind of places within the workspace that you end up creating.
That's a term that we use commonly when we're talking to artists about approaching site specific work is creativity within constraints. Because you hear, a lot of times, oh, come up with something, right? But coming up with something out of thin air can actually be quite difficult. Some of the most creative ideas I've ever seen come into play when there's some really tight constraints and context. And when you put those factors into place, you actually, I think, become more creative because you know the framework that you're working in.
Oh, I totally agree with that 100%. I think that you often get more creative solutions when you understand kind of what those rules of the site or the client are. And sometimes it's really hard to draw those out, right? Like with a site specific art piece, there might be very real constraints on the size you have, or there's a wall here, or you can't hang that because it's too heavy, but with design sometimes and figuring out what those constraints are from the client, they might not tell you right away, in trying to dig out kind of, is it a budget thing or is it a very deep ingrained part of your culture that you just can't vocalize. And I think that that's one of the most exciting things to kind of draw out the creative process, is just really trying to dig into what is it that the client really wants, and what are kind of those boundaries that you want to work within to get them what it is they're looking for. Because often you can't get them to just tell you, right? It takes lots of iteration and kind of putting forth different designs for them to be like, oh, that's it. When they see it, they know. But it's really hard to know what that is before they see whatever the completed product is. So that's kind of been an interesting challenge. And one thing that I was really surprised with actually working with your team and the process of how the artists come with their concepts and kind of working through, uh, and seeing the creative outcomes, right? When you put the same space in front of an artist and say, here's the box that you have, or here's the canvas that you're going to work within, and then seeing all the different perspectives come out of that. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's cool because what you're describing is you've got all these known elements, right? These known elements, you're going to have this wall, this carpet, this furniture, and maybe some of that is a bit predetermined. And of course, the vision and the narrative, everyone's aligned on what we're trying to do. And we even have a site picked out for the location. But on the project, that big tech project that you and I are working on together, of course, we've got these sites picked out, and then we put the constraints in place and said to a handful of artists, and we did an invitational call and said, what would you do? What would your design be for this approach? And selected artists to submit designs and provided a design fee for that early stage. And the outcome of that process is so wildly cool because the solutions are completely different. And I've never ceased to be amazed at how creative people can be within those constraints and confines of parameters for a specific site location, and different mediums, different materials, different interpretations of an idea. And that's the part that can be really fresh, and start to define an idea in a new way. It kind of brings this fresh perspective, this little edge to the designs that we've been working on, for and the concepts that you've been working on for years. Because as you said, you've been working on this idea for so long, and then you come in with the art solutions and the commissions and seeing what artists come up with, and it can be just this like boost of fresh energy.
I love that. I mean, I just remember how fun it was in those meetings when we were seeing some of those concepts for the first time and how much discussion and engagement that brought forth to the client, because I think it was the first. There's something about art and the way that you can comment on it kind of right away, and you don't have to. I guess in that context, it was less intimidating, right, for the client to be able to say, like, here's this art piece that I can comment on and feel a connection to within this space. And sometimes I think because um, interior design is maybe a little bit more abstract, they have less comments in a way. So it was a really fun way to get a new perspective for them to be like, look, here's this piece engaging with this architectural space. How does that all work together? Because if it works for you, then that means we're meeting this request for this concept to kind of envelop your user. And it was a really fun moment, I think, in the project for them to feel like, okay, yes, this is where how it comes together, and could see kind of more of that vision and influence of what the overall picture of the space was going to be. So that it was so fun.
Well, collaboration and coming together is a huge part of your role and your world in creating the built environment, is finding all the right members of the team. So it's an amazing thing when you pull it off well. And it's also important to, be efficient and bring in the right people at the right time. So how do you balance all of that? And how do you, go about the technical components of deciding who comes in and when, and how much to budget, who needs to be there, and when you should start thinking about things like art.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's certainly dependent on the project and the how much we can gauge whether or not a client is interested in bringing in, either an art consultant or a specific artist or using their existing collection. And I think as art becomes more of a key component to some of our designs, we're getting better and better about thinking about that. I think that's where the hospitality sector has already kind of figured out that art in the realm of hospitality is so important, and they have a great sense of when to kind of start engaging that. And with corporate clients, I think we're just kind of uh, we're getting better and better now. I think it's saying, like, this is something that's really important for you at the start of the project, or saying, okay, it can take a little bit more of a back seat on this project. Um, and it just depends on the client what that's going to be right for. But I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head of what I love about doing the design, and um, kind of being able to lead these projects. You get the opportunity to say, like, here's where you want to bring this person in. Here's this wonderful artist or consultant that can help you find the exact thing that you want. And that's true for not only the art, but all the components of a project, the materiality, the furniture, the build space, and working with those partners is what, and seeing them all come together is what I do derive the most joy from. I think in my job is like when kind of that harmony comes together and you're working with a great contractor and you're working with a great, all of their subs and the artist is a part of that, just as our lighting designers or graphic designers or all of these other people that influence a project on the whole. I think um, I have the most fun when those partners are, of course, like fun people to work with, but also just creative and wonderful people that are bringing great ideas to all make the project a success.
I'm just curious about personally, what do you think about when you are designing a workspace that you want to be in? Like in your office, in your home office, what are things that are important to you?
Oh gosh, that's a fun question. And I don't think, well, I don't know. Me personally, I think I get so sucked up into my project. Sometimes my home personal environment gets put on the back burner a little bit. And I'm like, wait, what do I like? There's so much out there. But I think, I always tell either friends or just, people that ask, when they find out you're an interior designer, what should I do? And for me personally, I think it's like whatever resonates with you. Like, I don't think that you should be constrained by like this thought of this is what I should have in my house or this is what I think my space should look like. I guess if you're curating a space, there's a little bit of that, but especially for a home when you're just, I just try and find things that I love. And that can be, it doesn't have to be a super fancy fine art thing. I think, there's wonderful, just like, um, pretty much anything that you want to make into art. If you find joy with it, I think you can find a good place in your home for it. And that's something that I have been trying to be more cognizant of. I had been living in Los Angeles and moved to Seattle about 4 years ago now. And we were able to buy a home. And so now that I finally have this home, filling it with the things that are going to be lasting and kind of these um, snippets of what I love has been kind of my goal rather than kind of just trying to get it all decorated out or anything.
What about future trends? Are you seeing things that you think will impact the way that you work or the way that you design in the future?
Well, I think art was one of those things actually, as I thought about that question. Art has been coming into the workplace more and more and has started, I think, more exponentially recently with just the whole like work from home, work from office, people trying to get these more home like artifacts into their space. Art is a big piece of that. And finding that within your office is one of those things that we've been talking to clients a lot about. And I've seen clients asking for more. How can we bring some of these um, elements into the workspace that make it feel more like home? And I think art is one of those things that really does do that. And so um, clients are certainly talking about what that means now for them in relationship to everyone's home being different, right, and eclectic. And so how in a workplace do you provide that sense without it not just being like a total chaotic um, hodgepodge of everyone's stuff coming back to the office? If everyone brings their art to the office, it's going to be a little crazy.
Well, a question that we like to ask everyone on the show. Can you tell us about a personal art experience, a concert, play, architecture, museum visit, piece of artwork, something that made an impression on you or that was especially memorable?
The first one that's coming to my mind, I think, um, is from my grandparents' former home. They were always very into art, and so looking back, I've really appreciated kind of having that kind of history and being in my grandparents' home that was filled with really great art and just kind of being around that. But there was a Matisse poster just that my grandmother had picked up, and it hung in the kitchen on the side of a cabinet. It was kind of long and tall and narrow. I don't remember what the poster piece was, but I just remember always seeing it as this moment coming into their kitchen. The colors were very bold. It had Matisse's kind of, of course, beautiful graphics and layering and these bold kind of shapes overlapping each other. And there was kind of this like man in the background of it. And I just remember, equating that with their home and that space, and how it was comforting to see, as well as just something very interesting to look at. It always changed when I was there. It was always there, and it was this kind of constant when I went to their house, and it was, memorable, but it always looked different. And I noticed different things about that art piece every time I went. And I think that's something, that's been in the back of my mind when I think about creating these spaces for people to work in, and creating environments that people spend so much of their day and work life in. How can it be something that is comforting, that's there and constant, and you feel comfortable in, but there's going to be unique surprises and things that you find in it throughout your time there, that keep bringing you back or making you think about things in a different way.
Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you'd like to share with our listeners, Poppy?
It's some people equate interior design with art, and I think there is a lot about that with art and architecture and kind of these worlds colliding. But I I don't consider myself an artist, I guess, and so I love kind of um, exploring what the difference is between those, and kind of seeing the beauty and craft and artistry of like your artists and the things that you bring to a project, and how that can meld with the interior environment and be a part of it, but is kind of unique and special.
Art as a constant is such a beautiful concept to think about that through your life, and experiencing your grandparents' art collection and having art being the thing that was there always, and and then you changing and growing, but still being able to see it perhaps in a new light every time. So thank you for sharing that story. Poppy, it's been so wonderful to have you on the show today. Thank you so much. And if our listeners here, Poppy, want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
I do have a personal Instagram. My handle's at Popagram, and I post some work there, but mostly probably personal kid pictures.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and teaching us more about designing engaging workplaces. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing to enhance the built environment, and help us all be more productive in our workplaces and find joy in our everyday lives. So thank you, Poppy.
Thanks, Martha. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for tuning in for today's episode of Dot Dot Dot. And to keep up with our latest, be sure to subscribe to 9 Arts on YouTube, or to Dot 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 wherever you get your podcasts. Do you have feedback or ideas for the show? Well, email us at letstalk@9arts.com. And until next time, on behalf of everyone at 9 Arts, here's wishing you some inspiring art experiences.